All right, today we're going to talk all about HDR blending using my Wacom tablet. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Eric Marks with FindingMiddle-earth.com, and today we're going to talk all about HDR blending. So I really appreciate all of the comments and messages I've gotten about this because it helps me provide what content I need to release on the channel in order to help people. Because that's really why I created this channel, is just to help people with photography. So the more I see trends in you guys asking the same question, the more it helps me release content, and the more it helps me know that it will help people. Because whenever I come up with video ideas, I just kind of brainstorm and kind of come up with an idea, and then I just hope that it helps somebody. But if you guys, if I see 10 or 15 comments asking the same basic question, then I know that I'm definitely going to make a video on that, and I know that's going to help quite a few people. So I've gotten a lot of messages about this, and so we're going to go ahead and attack this now. But I do want to say something. So I very rarely use HDR software anymore. I used to use Photomatix quite a bit, and then take the Photomatix HDR result and then kind of blend it back into the originals. I still do that some, but ever since I've really gotten into these Wacom tablets over the past year and a half or so, I pretty much only use my Wacom tablet because I have this pen and I can use it like a paintbrush, and I can very naturally use brush strokes to blend in my exposures. And so you're going to see exactly that. There's not a whole lot of videos on YouTube about this specifically in HDR. There's a lot about Wacom tablets and for graphic designers, but very few photographers use this for HDR. Most of them use it for portrait touch-ups. So I just want to show all of you the importance that a Wacom tablet can have on your landscape photography. So let's go ahead and jump in, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so we have this 3 bracket set here that I shot a while back, and the reason I chose these 3 is because I think it's a really good example of blending in the clouds here, these kind of dark, stormy clouds with the very bright foreground and middle ground. So I took 3 brackets all together. You can see I took with the even exposure here, the dark exposure, and then the overexposed. And this one actually ended up being a little too bright, so I don't think I even need this one, but I'm going to bring it into Photoshop just in case. So as you can see, this is at a top of a mountain here, and we have this a lot of dynamic range here because that day there was these really dark, moody clouds, and there wasn't a whole lot of light on the foreground. It was just very dappled light because you can see these little light pockets here in the clouds where all the light was just kind of barely spilling through. So for one exposure, which is this one, it didn't really give me enough information in the clouds that I was happy with to where I could just do it all in one photo. So I took 3, and we're going to go ahead and bring them into Photoshop, and I'll show you how I start the blending process. So now I've already done my basic Lightroom adjustments on these, by the way. So just, I enabled the profile corrections, removed the chromatic aberration, and all that good stuff. So we're going to go to Tools, Photoshop, and then Load Files into Photoshop Layers. And that will shoot them over to Photoshop here. It'll just take a minute to load them in. Okay, here we go. So basically what I start with is I always see which layer I want to be kind of my base image. Typically it's the even exposure, which is the the first one that your meter thinks is correct, which is this top one here. But the more and more I kind of switch these layers off, I think I'm actually going to start with this one. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that dark one on top and start with that one. That's kind of my workflow. My starting layer that I brush through is always going to be the top layer, and then I'm going to work down from there. So the reason I want to start with this one is because this one already has those great textured clouds that I want, and it's got it's a little dark, but I can fix that. And then I'm just going to brush in some of the foreground and the middle ground. So really, it's as easy as just natural brush strokes. So here's the middle exposure, and I think I'm just gonna. Yeah, I mean, really the sky is really good on the top one, so I think I'm just going to brush in the foreground and middle ground. So I'm just going to select my top layer here, go down here and create my layer mask, and then, accidentally moved that. Let me undo that real quick. And then hit B on the keyboard for my brush, And then you can go up here and create the opacity, which means how much of the layer you want to paint in. So I want to paint in maybe about, let's do maybe 25% of that other layer. Somewhere around 25, 27, doesn't matter. So I'm going to make the brush a little bigger. Typically, just so you know, the bigger the brush and the softer the brush, the more natural it looks. So I'm going to right click on my brush and make sure my hardness is at 0. So hardness is kind of like your feathering. So hardness is at 0, which is great. And now I'm just going to kind of stroke some light back in here. And I like to do kind of circular motions. Sometimes I do just left and right, but I like just kind of a circular motion so that it's very, very natural. And as you can see, I'm literally just doing my own manually blending here with my brackets. That way, instead of throwing them into Photoshop or Aurora HDR or something like that and letting them just kind of spit out whatever it wants, sometimes you can get a lot of noise when you let HDR software do that for you. It'll kind of throw them all together and do some kind of alignment and it do its own noise reduction, but in the end it can actually create a pretty artifact and all these artifacts and noise and pixelation and discoloration. And so I've found that when it comes to HDR nowadays with these Wacom tablets, I almost spend more time touching up the photos that come out of the HDR softwares versus just manually blending them, because then I have control the whole way. From start to finish, I'm manually doing everything. So that way, if there's anything I need to touch up, I can do it along the way. I don't have to let it these softwares keep making creative decisions for me and then fixing the issues later. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so back to this. I'm just going to keep kind of circling around and creating some light in the middle ground, more in the foreground. Maybe I'll just kind of dapple some lighting too. I'll just kind of pick up my brush here on the Wacom tablet and just kind of tap down here and tap some light into places. And by the way, every time you pick up the Wacom brush here and you brush through it again, it creates another 27% opacity. So what as a good example is, I'll undo this, but the more, so I'm going to take one brush stroke here and then another brush stroke and another, and you can see it's getting lighter just in this one spot because I keep brushing over it. The second you pick your brush up and you stroke, do one more brush stroke, it makes it more, it doubles the opacity. So 27% will be the first stroke, and then another 27% will be the second stroke, and so on and so forth until you get to 100%. So, all right, I think that looks pretty decent for the foreground. Now I'm going to make my brush a little smaller and go and add some light on some of these bushes here. I'll just kind of add some light into there. But I don't want to add too much because it was a very dark and moody day. So, always remember when you're blending, you have so much control that sometimes it can get a little out of control. You can kind of make things look a little too unrealistic. So, if you're seeing what I'm doing here, a lot of people might have just kind of went, what the heck are you doing? You just added tons of brightness to the horizon. Remember, I want to keep things as real as possible. So when you're talking about the horizon here, even on a cloudy day, sunset, sunrise, cloudy day, it's always going to be darker up here and gradually get lighter as it travels to the horizon. That's just the way light works. So I'm going to make my brush even bigger, and I'm going to go to the opacity and tone it down to around 15% and add a little more light around the horizon. I'll just kind of do that. Let's kind of dapple it over the trees. There we go. And that just looks a little more natural to me. And I might undo, if you hit the X key on your keyboard, it'll reverse the mask and you can undo some of the strokes. I might undo a little bit of the light just right here in the center. Let's see, just around there. Okay, then I'll go back to my brush and I want a little more in the immediate foreground. So let's do just right around here. There's just a little circle right around here. Because that's kind of the center focal point and it kind of carries your eye out through here. But I want the main kind of the star of this image to be the clouds. So I'm going to do a few things to touch those up in a bit. Okay, I think that's good for that. So as you can see, I mean, look, we blended these two together, and you can see the layer mask over here, exactly what I blended, and it's beautiful. It's very natural. It's not too HDR-y. It looks, like I used a graduated filter, or it looks like my camera had like 20 stops of dynamic range. It's great. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten these down. All right, we'll merge them all into one layer. And then I'm going to make a duplicate of this layer. And I'm going to hit Shift-Command-A on my keyboard, which is going to open this up into Adobe Camera Raw. I think for this, I know I want to use the graduated filter to darken the sky a little more, but I'm going to raise the overall exposure a little bit. I'm going to add some contrast. There we go. Raise the shadows a good bit. Take down the highlights a little bit. Raise the blacks to kind of even out the dynamic range. You always want to look at your histogram and see where the information is that you're playing with. And then as far as clarity, I just want clarity in the foreground, and I want it in the middle ground right over these trees. And I might add some in some of the really textury areas of the clouds, but I don't want clarity everywhere. I want to do localized clarity instead of global clarity. So I'll show you how I'm going to do that in just a second. Let's see, contrast shadows. I think that's about good for now. Let's go ahead and jump over to the graduated filter. I'm just going to drag straight down, and we will add some minus exposure here. All right. Good. I'm not going to drag it down too far because remember what I said about the horizon. If you kill all the light in the horizon like that, it's not going to look real. You want it to get just a tad bit brighter as you get to the horizon. So I might go there. All right. And let's use the contrast, add a little more contrast out of the clouds. There we go. And then I'm going to hit my Z key to be done with that, and you'll notice that it darkened down the tree here a little bit, which I'm actually okay with. I'm going to paint a little bit of light back in there anyway, but I'm okay with that. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't look unnatural because the tree is up here in the sky, and there was almost no light hitting this. It was very, very dark, and I'm probably going to add a vignette around this anyway, so the tree is going to fall in that darkened vignette. So I'm going to go here to my adjustment brush so I can do some localized adjustments here. I'll make my brush a little bigger, and we're just going to add some clarity. So maybe about around 45%. And let's just add it in these little textury areas where the light is. Draw on some of this. And you can see it's a very subtle difference that it's making. Make the brush smaller, but I think it is a very necessary difference because it really, really makes those clouds stand out, and it really emphasizes the drama and the danger of the storm that day. When we were at the top of this mountain, there were severe thunderstorm warnings and tornado watches all around the county. So I mean, it was a very, very stormy, windy, dangerous day, which is my favorite time to shoot. I know I've said that a lot. I'm kind of crazy, but I love shooting in storms. If there's a storm threat, you can find me out shooting in that anytime. I will always be out when there's storms because you get the best, just the craziest looking clouds and the craziest looking skies. Okay, so I think that's about good with the clarity on that. I'm going to add some clarity on the middle ground. Zoom in a little bit. And let's add some clarity on the lake and on some of these hills in the midground. Now look at that. Look at that difference. Again, subtle, but it's so nice. It just makes it stand out. It kind of darkens it a little bit and just makes it stand out so nicely. I like that. Can't forget about these happy little hills in the back here. They make the photo just as nice as anything else in the photo. Gotta touch these guys up. All right, let's take a look at that. Yeah, that's great. I like that a lot. All right, I'm actually going to go back to the adjustment brush now that I'm done with that, and I'm also going to add a little bit of contrast in the middle ground here. So about 25%. I'll draw on that. Now look at that. That's having just a beautiful effect. And what's cool is this middle ground here. I guess because it's just one of these like infinity horizons where you can see out forever. It has this natural blue color going on, and I like that because once I bring out the color in the foreground, this golden wheat is going to have a really nice contrast between the gold, the green, the blue, and then the dark gray background. It's going to be like a beautiful mixture of colors. I'm actually really excited about that. So I'm going to add some more contrast here globally on the whole image. And then add some vibrance, just a little bit, some saturation, and add a little bit of golden colors here in the white balance. Just a little bit. Not too much about that. And then we'll do another adjustment brush for local adjustments. And I want a little more golden tones out of this foreground. So we're going to add contrast and a little bit of yellow to our white balance, and then a little bit of clarity. All right, let's see how this looks. Yep, beautiful. Love that. And I'm not doing much to the trees and the bushes. I just want the immediate foreground here with the rocks and the golden wheat there, and we'll make the saturation go up a little bit here. I want those tones in there. There we go. And I think the overall exposure is a little too green, so let's add a little bit of magenta in here to even out the white balance. There we go. More contrast. I just want to kill the contrast on this thing. I love this. I mean, it's so, this photo is so edgy as it is that I just really want to convey that to my viewers. Okay. So look at this. These blues that are coming out, these kind of like cornflower blues that are coming out in the middle ground are just, oh man, they're awesome. I love it. Because now I have my perfect contrast between this gold, the muted greens in the middle ground, the lake, the blue, and then this dark gray, kind of scary looking clouds. All right. Love that. I love that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do another adjustment brush. So I can add just a little bit, just ever so slightly, a little bit of exposure back into this tree here. Make a big brush, just a little bit around the edges here, just to really sell the effect to where we're not looking like we're blending things too much. Okay. Okay, cool. I think that is good there. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And let's look at the difference. That's what I'm always excited to see, because this one is so flat. I mean, look how flat that is, which is fine, because I remember I shoot in RAW format. So whenever you shoot in RAW, always remember that your photos are supposed to look like crap when they first get into the software, because if you shoot in RAW, that means you're turning all the sharpness off, all the contrast off, everything that the camera normally adds to like a JPEG, it's all gone. It's just giving you the flattest profile possible so that you can then go and make the creative decisions. So the image below here, as you can see, we started out after, this is like right after we blended it with the Wacom tablet. Look how flat. It's just, I mean, it's nicely exposed, yes, but everything's very flat. There's no interest there. It's just screaming for contrast and detail. So then you touch on our top layer and boom. I mean, just look at the difference there. It's really, really remarkable what you can do with a RAW file these days in the software. I mean, that is really something. I love that. Okay, what else do we want to do? Let's go ahead and merge these layers down. I'm going to duplicate the layer again, and I want to do my little blur effect that I normally do. So let's do a Gaussian blur. Let's blur it around, let's see, sure, around 33 pixels. And then if you've seen my videos, you know whenever I blur this, I always go and make the blurry layer about a stop or a stop and a half brighter, because whenever you blend a blurry layer with a sharp layer, you get a very dark result. So I make it brighter to begin with so that it doesn't make it too dark. So let's go to normal on the blending modes and do multiply. Now see how dark that is, even though I increase the exposure? It's pretty crazy. So let's back off the opacity a little bit. It's at 100% right now. Let's back it off to around, let's see, maybe 65-ish. Okay, and the reason I do this too is because whenever you have this crazy lighting, whenever I do this blur and blend effect, I love the fact that I can really see. It really emphasizes where the light is in the scene. And you can see with all these little holes in the clouds, it's emphasizing the light here and here. I can actually see where all these little dappled drops of light, these little puddles of light are kind of falling on my foreground. It's great. So now I know that I can hit the eraser tool on the top layer here, which was the blurry one, and I can start bringing back some of the natural sharpness. But I want to be way down on my opacity. So let's go to like 15, somewhere around there. Oh, let's go 15-ish. All right. And then I'll make my brush a little bigger, and let's just kind of paint over some of these brighter areas and kind of emphasize them even more. Tap over here. We'll tap over this tree that we made pretty dark earlier. Okay, I'm going to do one big stroke in the midground. Another stroke here, make that brighter. All right, just kind of touch up some of these rocks and bushes here, make them a little less edgy and contrasty. All right, kind of paint over that because I really want my viewers to, you know, I mean, when they see this, obviously I want the star of the image to be the clouds, but I really want them to notice this kind of chaotic foreground and then slowly go, oh, right, there's a lake here, and it kind of follows this little line over here, and then, oh, wow, look at these clouds, insane. So I always try to think about when I'm post-processing, not only when I'm composing my shot, but when I'm post-processing, I like to think about how I am drawn to the scene as I'm standing there. And then I get my camera out and I start thinking, okay, if I were looking at this as a photo online, or if I were looking at this as a print in a gallery, you know, how would my eyes kind of follow through this scene? So you really want to think about that. And a lot of people might be thinking, well, how do you think about that? It's really simple. Just look at the scene in front of you. Let it unfold. What about the scene is interesting to you? How do your eyes kind of follow through the scene? And then just put your camera in front of the scene, set it up in a way that looks interesting to your eyes, and convey the way that you felt about the scene through your imagery. And that's what art and photography is about. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that sells prints, is, you know, how do people's eyes kind of fluctuate through the photo? I mean, it's got to be interesting from foreground to background. There can't be anything in this that doesn't make sense. Okay, so I'm still kind of undoing some of the blur here in certain areas. I'm just kind of painting with the eraser. Bring back some of these golden tones. Really emphasizing the light here. Really loving the light. Okay. Good. And I'm going to leave most of it on the clouds. I'm not really going to erase much on the clouds, but I will do just right here, because I think that's just a tad too dark. Just this little middle area of the clouds. Okay. I really like that. So here is before the blur, and then after. That just added even more contrast and more dynamics and more creative lighting to the scene. Now this, remember, this one right here was our post-processed version that we did in Adobe Camera Raw just a few minutes ago. And just a few minutes ago, or about a minute ago, this is the one where we were like, oh man, this looks so much better than the original. But now it's funny how this even looks flat compared to our newest rendition of this photo. So you keep getting better and better. And I think it's a little dark in here, but that's okay because I'm going to increase the overall exposure. So yep, I like that. So let's go ahead and merge these two layers together, make another duplicate, hit Shift-Command-A on the keyboard. So we can bring up Camera Raw again, and we're gonna take the exposure up a little bit. Raise the shadows just a tad, and I want to add some vibrance again to really bring out those golden tones. Now look what the vibrance is doing to the blues. I think that's a little too over-exaggerated on the blues. So what I'm going to do to fix this is take an adjustment brush and make the brush smaller. I'm going to add a little bit of minus saturation, okay? And I'm going to take the temperature of the white balance to the yellows. There's about a million different ways you could do this. I'm just choosing to do it this way right now, and we'll see if it works. And so I just want to mute the blues a little bit. I mean, they became a little too dominant when I did that move with the vibrance. There we go, look, that's great. Nowhere near as punchy as they were a minute ago. Beautiful. That worked great. All right, so let's go ahead and get out of that. And now I have the increased vibrance on my foreground here. Those golden tones are really, really screaming, which I love. And then the nice blue, but not overdone on the blue. And then this great stormy cloud. I think it's great. I mean, this photo I love it. When I was on this hill, on this mountaintop, deciding how to take this photo, it was very puzzling at first because all of this is just so chaotic. I mean, there's dead trees, there's live trees, there's bushes, and then there's all this stuff here. And I was just trying to think, like, you know, how am I going to make this interesting? But really, it's interesting in itself because there's it's a very moody day. If this was a blue sky day and a very happy day, then this wouldn't work. But because it was so moody and dangerous looking, all of this chaos just kind of plays into the overall theme, and I really, really liked it. And then there's many layers to this photo. So there's this very immediate foreground, because I shot this at 16 millimeters, I believe. And so there's very immediate foreground, and then you have this layer here of the dead trees and some bushes, and then another layer of this lake and some of the rolling hills back here. And all these hills kind of roll in layers until you get way back here. There's another mountain way, way back here. You have to look really hard for it. And then, of course, the last layer is looking up at this crazy sky. So I don't know, I really liked this one. I thought this was a really good example of how to blend HDRs together. So we're good at making our last minute little tonal changes there with the yellows. And look at the difference even there. So this is before we took it into Adobe Camera Raw, right? Look at the yellows. Boom, they just pop. They just pop again. We raised the exposure and added some vibrance. I mean, all these little subtle changes really, really help the overall photo. I mean, you'd be surprised what just a couple of little sliders can do to really bring out the feeling that was, that you had when you were there on scene. Don't think, there's a lot of people that have all these ideas in their head from YouTube comments and Facebook comments and photographers' articles that they think that, if you spend 2 hours on a photograph in Photoshop, that you're just insane, you're a perfectionist, you overdo it. But if you spend 10 minutes on a photo, you don't do enough, or you're not a good enough photographer. Just take all of that information and just throw it out of your brain. There is no standard in editing. Everyone has a different way of doing things. Everyone has a different eye. Everyone has different creative taste. And that's what makes artists unique. So I said it in my last video, but uniqueness is what sells your prints. Uniqueness is what makes people book you for a job, because not only do we have different creative tastes, all of our clients have different creative tastes, right? When they're looking for something, when they're looking to book a photographer or book someone for creative media, they have an idea in their head of what they're looking for. And when they find that one photographer's website or one portfolio, boom, it clicks and they know who they want to use. So don't think that there's a certain amount of time or a certain amount of layers to use in Photoshop. It's all about what works for you. Again, I try to say it in every post-processing video. If I'm showing you, everything I do, my workflow, whatever, the only reason I show you this is because it might kind of unveil a new technique or a new way of doing something that you might like to try. But I never ever tell people that my way is just the way of doing things. I don't record my workflow sessions so that you can copy me, because I really strongly encourage you not to copy me. We need to evolve our own ways of doing things. And if, I personally have spent now, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes or so on this photo, and I like it. It's done. Sometimes I'll spend 45 minutes to an hour on a photo. It really depends on how far I want to go with it. Because I typically have an idea of what I want when I start working on a photo. And I don't stop until I get what I want. And I encourage you to do the same. Don't let any other photographer or any other person tell you different. If you like it and you think it's the way to go with it. And don't stop until you're pleased. So I think I'm about done. I might run it through a Nik Collection filter before it's done, but I don't want to drag the video on. That's a whole different video. I mean, this is easily good enough. I really like this. This photo is already in my portfolio, by the way. And I don't even remember exactly how I post-processed it before. I know this is generally the same way that it should look, hopefully, in my portfolio. But yeah, I just hope you guys got a lot from this video, that you don't always have to use HDR softwares. You can do your own blending manually. And as you saw, I didn't have to do many touch-ups on this because I had complete creative control from start to finish with this little pen here. I just use it as a paintbrush and use my paint strokes all the way through until I get a result that I like. And you can just brush all day long until it becomes as natural or as unnatural as you want it to be. You can still get the crazy HDR look with this if you want to. You don't have to have an HDR software to spit out some crazy textured, overly detailed thing. You can just blend them together and then use other filters and get the same result. But I strongly encourage you guys to not stop using HDR software, but really try getting one of these Wacom tablets and putting them to good use in your landscape photography, because I think you'll really like it. It's also fun. I mean, really, it's just fun. It's more interactive. I really feel like I'm really connecting with my photos instead of just using a mouse. I mean, I'm actually drawing and painting my photos together. It's really cool. So You guys have any questions at all? Obviously, as always, leave them in the comments. And thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. If you would like to stay up to date on all of my latest photography videos and adventures, click the big subscribe button below. And if you would like to find out more about me and how to become a great photographer, visit my website at findingmiddleearth.com.